It wasn't long before Peju began to notice weird things happening around her house. Doors were opening and closing by itself, and this terrified Peju, who had never experienced something like it before. She then began to notice that her daughter Bolu would oftentimes sit in a corner, staring blankly and whispering in a language no one could understand. Once upon a time, there lived a couple who had been married for over 10 years. They had no child and had done everything possible to conceive. Biodun and Peju loved each other so much, but their childlessness began to take a toll on their marriage. Although Biodun was so supportive of his wife Peju and never gave her any reason to worry, Peju could not stand the idea that she had been married for over 10 years without a child. She would look herself in the mirror and blame herself for their childlessness. Her husband Biodun never stopped reassuring her that one day they would have a child of their own, but Peju's fate had already been tested. Peju at a point even suggested that they adopt a child from the village orphanage, but Biodun kicked against the idea, saying that they would have a child of their own soon. Biodun explained to his wife that adopting a child might complicate things for them. He explained that waiting a little longer might be the solution, as their prayers might just be answered as they wait. So Peju, although convinced within her heart that adopting a child was their best bet, listened to her husband and decided to be more patient. Peju derived so much joy whenever she was around children. She ensured that she attended any ceremony that had to do with children, as she always pleaded with the mother of such a child to lay their hands on her and bless her with her own child. Peju believed that doing so would break any curse that had haunted her life and rendered her childless for all these years. However, on one bright morning, Peju decided to attend the naming ceremony of her friend's baby. Whilst the ceremony was still ongoing, Peju walked up to her friend Bisi to congratulate her for the birth of her baby. She then stretched forth her hand happily to carry Bisi's baby, but Bisi refused to give her the baby. Peju tried to act as though she did not notice her friend's attitude towards her. She stepped away, and just when she was about leaving the ceremony, she overheard her friend Bisi discussing with another girl, saying that she can never allow Peju to touch her baby with her barren hands. She went on to say that Peju had killed all the babies in her womb with her witchcraft and that she would never allow her to kill her own child. Peju stood there frozen as she listened to her friend Bisi spew out so many terrible things about her. Unable to control her emotions, Peju burst out in tears as she returned to her home extremely sad. Her husband Biodun, on seeing how saddened Peju was, held her in his arms as he comforted her. He knew that his wife Peju was deeply hurt by the incident and decided that it was time to put a stop to all their struggles. Biodun decided to grant his wife's wish by agreeing to adopt a baby from the village orphanage. Peju could not believe her ears as she danced around in jubilation. The next morning, Peju could not contain her joy. She was like a baby who had just been given a candy. She walked happily with her husband as they headed to the village orphanage. Once they arrived at the orphanage, Peju caught sight of a quiet girl who sat in a corner alone. Peju immediately picked an interest in her and decided to adopt her. The matron of the orphanage, Mama Ireti, told them that the girl's name was Bolu and that she was found abandoned in the forest when she was still a baby. She told Biodun and his wife Peju that Bolu was a child who hated to mingle with other children. The matron tried to dissuade them from adopting Bolu, but nothing she did worked, as Peju's mind was already made up to adopt Bolu as her own daughter. They finalized her adoption and were free to take her home. Peju had never been this happy in her entire life. She She could not stop staring at Bolu, who was a dream come true for her. All the sadness she had felt for all these years seemed to disappear as Peju showered Bolu with so much love. The days that followed were one of Peju's best days as she spent her time getting to know her daughter Bolu. Everything seemed perfect as Bolu adapted quickly to her new home. Peju and Biodun showered their daughter with so much love and attention, and for the first time in years, their house was filled with laughter and joy. However, it wasn't long before Peju began to notice weird things happening around her house. Doors were opening and closing by itself, and this terrified Peju, who had never experienced something like it before. One morning, Peju woke up to realize that all the plants in her garden had mysteriously died and wondered how this was possible. She then began to notice that her daughter Bolu would oftentimes sit in a corner, staring blankly and whispering in a language no one could understand. Whenever Bolu did this, Peju and her husband would start fighting and quarreling for no just cause. One day, they fought for hours, and when they finally regained their consciousness, they realized that they had damaged most of their properties. They looked ahead and saw Bolu sitting on a chair as she stared angrily at them. Peju and Biodun were so terrified of her as they knew that she was the one behind all that had been happening. That same evening, whilst Peju was preparing lunch in the kitchen, her pot of soup mysteriously poured to the ground, barely missing her legs. She turned behind her and saw Bolu, who was looking at her angrily. Bolu walked back into her room and sat on her chair, and Peju shook in extreme fear. A few minutes later, Peju heard a weird noise coming from Bolu's room and decided to check what it was. She opened the door and found Bolu speaking to an invisible force. Peju asked Bolu who she was talking to, and Bolu screamed at her in anger as the items in her room began to fall to the ground. Peju ran out of the room terrified. Shaking in fear, she waited for her husband to return and narrated all that happened to him. They both sat in a corner and deliberated on what to do. Should we send her back to the orphanage? Biodun asked his wife, who shook her head in disagreement, saying that Bolu was just an innocent child that needed to be loved right. They then decided that no matter what happened, they would always show Bolu unconditional love. Late that night, whilst Peju and Biodun were fast asleep, they heard a sound at their door and decided to check what it was. To their surprise, they saw Bolu walking out of their hut alone. Curious as to where she was going at that time of the night, Biodun and Peju decided to secretly trail her. They followed her through the village, keeping a safe distance to avoid being seen. Their hearts pounding as they watched their daughter advance into the depths of the village forest to a part that was known to be avoided by the villagers. Bolu led them to a huge tree in the forest, where she stood and began to chant in a strange language. Her voice deepened like one possessed by an evil spirit as dark figures emerged from the tree and began to circle around her as she continued with her chant. Terrified at what they were seeing, Biodun and Peju decided to quickly retreat as they feared what would happen to them if Bolu caught sight of them in the forest. As they turned to leave, they heard Bolu scream. They turned to check what had happened and realized that Bolu had fallen unconscious on the ground. They quickly rushed to her and carried her home, worried that something terrible might have happened. For hours, Bolu laid on her bed like a log of wood. All efforts to wake her up proved abortive as her parents wondered what could have happened. They waited patiently for her to wake up, and after a few hours, Bolu stood up from her bed and smiled at them. Her smile sent shivers down their spines as they tried so hard to pretend as though nothing had happened. Despite the terror that Bolu brought into their home, Biodun and Peju never stopped loving her. They continued to care for her, showering her with affection and kindness. They spoke to her gently, reassuring her of their love for her. Bolu, in her quiet moment, began to feel the warmth of their love and kindness. It was something she had never experienced before, and it started to touch the good part of her heart. She began to fight the darkness within her, and this was not an easy battle for her. One evening, whilst Peju sat behind Bolu and braided her hair, Bolu burst out in tears. These were not the tears of the evil spirit, but the genuine tears of a little girl who had been abandoned and possessed for so long. Peju held her close, whispering words of love and comfort to her. She told her that no matter what happens, that she would be there for her, and Bolu felt a love that she had never felt before. That night, when everyone went to sleep, Bolu had a dream where she was standing at the edge of a dark forest and an evil spirit was trying to pull her back into the shadows. But on the other side, her parents, Biodun and Peju, were calling her name, their voices filled with love and hope. Bolu gathered all her strength and ran towards the light, towards the voices that had shown her nothing but kindness. When she woke up, something had changed. The darkness within her had weakened, and Bolu was now filled with extraordinary strength. The evil spirit inside her was still there, but it was no longer in control of her. As the days went by, Bolu continued to fight the evil that resided within her. The strange happenings around the house became less frequent, and Bolu laughed and played like the child that she was. One evening, whilst Bolu was playing in front of her house, she fell to the ground and began to convulse. Biodun and Peju rushed to her side, terrified that the evil spirit was making a final attempt to reclaim her body. But as they held her, speaking words of love and encouragement, something miraculous happened. Bolu's body became still, and a dark shadow emerged from her body and disappeared. The evil spirit was expelled, banished forever by the power of their love and Bolu's own determination to be free. In that moment, Bolu sat on the ground as she continued to breathe heavily. She looked up at her parents and smiled, happy to be free. In the months that followed, the bond between Bolu and her parents grew stronger, and their home was now filled with joy and laughter. One evening, whilst Peju was preparing dinner, she felt a fluttering in her stomach. This was quite unusual, as she began to feel so different. The next morning, she decided to visit the village healer about how she was feeling and was told that she was pregnant. Peju could not believe her ears, as what she had longed for all these years was finally a reality. She broke the news to her husband Biodun, who jumped up in excitement as he could not believe that his wife was finally pregnant. Bolu could not also contain her joy, as she could not wait to be a big sister. Months passed, and Peju finally gave birth to healthy twin boys. Their joy knew no bound, as their home was now filled with the love and happiness that they had dreamed of. The poor orphan girl, who they accepted into their home wholeheartedly, despite the evil that plagued her life, brought unimaginable blessings into their home. The lesson to be learned from this story is that light will always triumph over darkness. Spread love wherever you go, as you never know the impact your little act of kindness would have in the life of another. Learn not to be so judgmental of others and treat everyone the way you would like to be treated. I hope you enjoyed the story.
Like, subscribe and leave a comment. It helps us grow our channel. I'll see you in our next story. Bye.